Hello everyone. Welcome to today's Healthy Place Insta Live. We're going to be talking about living with obsessive compulsive disorder. And we have two guests. First is Cheryl, who's lived with OCD for about as long as she can remember. And then we'll talk more about OCD with psychologist Dr. Heidi Green, author of the book, The Path to Self-Love and World Domination. So thank you for being here. And remember that at any time you can ask questions of our guest or share your experiences or comments with OCD, and we will talk about them as the show goes on. So let me see here. Bring on Cheryl. Let me see. There she is. And hello. That's Cheryl. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
Oh, it's been a week.
Well, thank you for sharing this part of it with us. I appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, how long have you had to deal with OCD?
Well, my mom first noticed my excessive hand washing when I was 5 years old. And I developed a series of rituals after that to try to mitigate my obsessive thoughts. I would turn on light switches repeatedly, walk into a room a number of times until it felt right. And that went on until I was about 20 years old and I was finally diagnosed. We finally started trying some different treatments.
What led you to the diagnosis?
I had a mental health crisis in college. It was after a failed relationship. And I called my parents and I pretty much begged them for help because I didn't know what to do anymore to try to control my anxiety. It was just completely out of control.
Mm-hmm. And I guess something else happened when you were 31. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I went on a medication and I wasn't having a very good reaction to it. Partly because I had undiagnosed bipolar disorder, but it kind of drove the OCD out of control because I was awake all the time and therefore worrying all the time. And I was having these intense guilt complexes. I thought that I had committed a crime of some sort when, in fact, no crime at all had been committed. It led to self-harming behavior, and it ultimately led me to a hospitalization where I was in the hospital for 11 days. Basically just delusional, and most of it was the result of the OCD and not being properly medicated for either the OCD or the bipolar disorder. So
that sounds like it was pretty scary.
Oh yeah.
Let's see. All right, we're going to talk about some of the symptoms of OCD, and I know you're going to mention compulsive thoughts. So can you explain a little bit about what a compulsive thought is, and then tell us some of the ones you've had to go through?
Mine are recurrent negative thoughts, mostly involving something I may or may not have done, something I perceive that I've done wrong. And you just kind of get stuck in a loop where you think, oh, I did this wrong, I did this wrong, I did this wrong. And you can't rationalize your way out of it. You can't say, oh no, you're fine. You can't think of anything else. You center on that thought, and that's pretty much all you can think about. And also I have intrusive thoughts, which are just unwanted thoughts that randomly pop into my head. And, sometimes it involves, something that I would never do, like saying something out loud in public that I would never say. It's really hard because it's all in your head and it's very internalized. At least it is for me. I don't know how other people deal with it, but like I just kind of internalize it until like I'm kind of like a pressure cooker and like
Right.
So
the thoughts that come into your mind they're provoke a guilt complex, right? They're telling you did things you didn't do, or you're going to do things you're not going to do. And you talked about the ones for thinking that you had committed a crime. And what was that like? When you have your mind telling you did something?
It's very hard to explain. And now that I'm properly medicated for it, like I look back on that and I'm like, what was going on there? It's really hard to explain. It's just you manage to repetitively think of yourself as this bad person so much that you believe you're capable of anything when in fact you're not.
Right. Okay. You mentioned excessive hand washing when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still have that? Are you still dealing with that?
Oh yes. Especially this week.
Really, what's happening this week?
My son has gone into a bit of a crisis, a bit of a mental health crisis, and we are trying to deal with it at home. I'm looking into day treatment options, but I'm not getting any response. So it's I've had to take some time off work, and then it's made my symptoms kind of go out of control because my anxiety is a little bit out of control right now. So
yeah, I would imagine that's what would happen in that case. I'm sorry to hear about your son, and I imagine you're having to change everything around, to be able to care for him. And do you have a support system of any kind? Do you have people who can help you while this is going on?
unfortunately, yes, we do have a medical support system in place for him that includes family support for me, which is very useful. Unfortunately, I'm inadequately insured right now, so I don't have access to any sort of therapy on my own.
Wow.
Which is very difficult. And I feel like I need maybe a medication adjustment, and that'll have to all be out of pocket. And so that's really difficult. But
yeah, so does that cause you more concern looking into the future? I guess, does a normal thought like that anybody would have, not being able to afford their medication, right? Does that turn into compulsive thoughts or intrusive thoughts?
it does. My mind often leads to the worst case scenario, like what if I have to go off my medication? Like what if I can no longer afford it? Which, I mean, there's always a potential for that. And I don't know how I would survive without it, honestly. And so that's very scary, especially considering I have, a disabled child to care for. So
What, well, let me share this. Paradiso 75 says, "Oh my goodness, this is me. Sometimes it can seem so difficult, especially in the time we're living in." So I think she's probably talking about COVID. And how is that affecting you? How is this time we're living in affecting you?
It's increased the stress about tenfold, I think. I've been trying to hold on to a job that I've been going to on site. But as I said, I'm having to care for my son. So I'm very torn right now between trying to support him financially and emotionally. But just going on site, like every time there's a case where I work, it really, my anxiety just goes up, and I don't want to be there anymore, but I know I can't leave, so it puts me between a rock and a hard place. And every time we go out, I worry, especially about my son. I worry about him contracting, something that, because you just never know what the complications are going to be. And so with the unpredictability of it, I think that's the scariest part of it.
I have another question here. Mick21 says, "Please describe what an average day is like for you living with OCD."
I'm kind of mired in my routine. People have compared me to a cat in that way. I have my routines, and if I vary from those routines, I get very stressed out. And then, of course, you have the intermittent episodes where you have to, do your little rituals to try and mitigate your own anxiety. It involves setting up a lot of medications at night, just to keep an even keel. It's a constant struggle. You kind of have to find ways to distract yourself to not think these negative thoughts. It's very hard though, because if you're left alone with your thoughts, it can be a very, very kind of dangerous thing, and you can go to pretty dark places. So,
like, do you ever have thoughts of suicide? Does it go that dark?
Yeah.
Those are, I know what those are like, but I can't imagine them being intrusive all the time and going around in my head all of the time, because with depression, I'm kind of able to put them aside. But if I'm right, if I had OCD, that's just not an option. You don't just push that stuff aside.
Yeah, you're
So,
kind of literally your own worst enemy and your own worst critic. And it's like there are things that you should be able, and people will say to you, just let it go. And they don't understand that you're wired a little bit differently and you can't. It's just, it's not possible. I mean, with medication, therapy, education about things, I've gotten better, but I mean, there are weeks like this week where I just, it's not, it's, it's almost unbearable at times.
do you have any certain rituals you do now to help with the anxiety?
Mostly my default is hand washing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I will get into a mode where I will just clean everything or organize everything, because it helps me. It's like I'm trying to control what I can control because I can't control my thoughts. And so I try to put everything in its place in order to feel some semblance of control. And it doesn't always work, but
Well, what you're describing with the cleaning is kind of like what the main stigma about OCD is. When people say, "Oh, I'm so OCD," they're talking about being really particular about how things are. So, what would you say to somebody who throws that around so cavalierly?
I would say you have no idea what you're talking about. This is something that has affected me since I was 5 years old, and it's very hurtful, to hear people say that because they don't really understand the implications of that,
Mm-hmm.
um, to a person that's actually suffering.
Right, it goes a lot deeper than what most people imagine.
Hmm.
And, yeah. Okay, so today is a little rocky because of everything going on at home, with your son and the medications and therapy. What what happened when you stopped therapy? I'm assuming you were in therapy at one point and then had to stop.
Yeah, I started and stopped therapy many times because they would prescribe medications and they would just keep me up all the time and they wouldn't work because I had the undiagnosed bipolar. And so it was a
Mm-hmm.
lot until I was in the hospital, when I actually found an effective medication for the OCD. But basically, I would be interested in therapy. I would go to therapy and then I would be dissatisfied with the results of the therapy and stop it and then just continue to suffer and
Mm-hmm.
just put on a brave face. And when people ask you how you are, you just say, oh, I'm fine, but really you're just falling apart on the inside. And it's it's no way to live.
No, no.
So,
Minnie wants to know how OCD has affected your relationships.
oh well, I was divorced um, pretty recently, within the last 5 years. My OCD had a major impact just because my ex-spouse did not understand. I would try to explain, but it's hard to explain unless you actually have it. I think it's one of those because it's so internal and you don't externalize and you don't, have an episode where people actually see that you're having a problem. It's all in here and all in here. And,
Mm-hmm.
I would try to explain and it just, my anxiety would get really bad and I would get depressed as a result. And it just, there was a real lack of understanding, a real lack of compassion there. And luckily now I have a boyfriend who is a lot more understanding, which has been immensely helpful, especially considering what my child is currently going through. So,
Right, right. So, how about with your son? He has his issues, and you have OCD. So, do you two ever bounce off of one another, or are you better able to support each other? How does that work?
I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. In some ways, we're much more empathetic toward each other, and we understand. When one of us is having an issue, we know what to do to say or to be a support. But on the other hand, like when he's been awake for days, it affects me because then I start to have my own issues. And my own
Mm-hmm.
issues start to get out of control, and then I feel like I can't care for him, and so it kind of goes back and forth.
Yeah, yeah. So, how does today, considering everything, compare with your worst day with OCD?
It's getting pretty close, honestly. I'm not
I'm
I'm not doing
sorry.
so well the last couple of days. it's just everything has kind of come to a head. And, you know, I hear about this 6-month wall that everybody hits with the pandemic, and I feel like I'm really there. And, you know, and I feel like just with everything that's been going on, I feel like I'm not managing as well as I could. I know, like, I have very few resources, like medically right now. So that's really scary, because before, when I went in the hospital, which was probably my very worst day, you know, it was self-harm. It was clearly, you know, a danger to myself or others type situation. That was definitely the worst day. And I don't want to get there again. I'm terrified of that happening. So
what would, if you had access to every person, what is the one thing that you think would help you the most? What could somebody do for you right now?
that's a tough one. Probably therapy. Therapy would be the most beneficial right now, because I'm on medication, and it's been working well until probably the last week. So.
You've had that peak go on there.
Mm-hmm.
So today, well, this week aside, let's go back to like last week, which was better than this week, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So what helps you deal with symptoms on an average period? You know, what coping skills do you use, or, you know, what helps you?
Music has always been a huge, I guess, a redirection for me. Ever since I was a kid, I used to play the violin, and I would practice really hard because it kind of took me to another place where I wasn't so focused on my negative thoughts. And that's held true throughout my life. I was a music major in college, and, you know, just I was practicing up to 8 hours a day some days, you know, and wow. It really helped me focus on something else and do something, you know, anything creative, really. You know, writing helps me, journaling helps me, you know, just getting it out there, really.
Expressing the anxiety in a way.
Yeah, kind of expressing it or dispelling it in any way that I can. Mm-hmm. But it's rough some days, you know, because you do get caught up in those worst case scenarios where you're like, what if, and
right. Dark Knight says, do you deal with religious scrupulosity? I'm always haunted by things I might be doing that anger God. Does that affect you? And is there anything that helps?
For years, I suffered with scrupulosity. I used to continually, obsessively pray. And in my prayers, every single thought had to be perfect. I couldn't have a negative thought within that prayer, or I would have to cancel it out and start praying all over again, until I got to amen, and then I was good. I kind of, when I started reading more about it, I kind of understood what I was doing. And so I was able, not everyone's able to do this, but I was able to kind of take a step back and say, hey, this is not you. This is your brain telling you that mm-hmm. that you're sinning, or that you're doing something wrong, or that you're morally not up to par. And that's just not the case. It's just because you're thinking it doesn't mean it's true, you know? So, mm-hmm. And that's I think that's the hardest thing, is like to look at yourself and say, you're a good person. And the things that you're telling yourself aren't necessarily true.
Yeah, I can, especially when it's just constant bombardment with it. But what other coping skills? You have music, and you talked about you're able to kind of separate yourself from the disease and say, you know, this is my OCD telling me this, not me telling me this. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really great skill to have. Do you exercise? Do you use that for relief? Or, you know, people say, oh, go out in nature, but, you know, it's not going to cure anything. It won't cure, but sometimes those things help. Do you have any like standard things that you like to do?
Sometimes we'll go have a fire out back, and look at the stars. Sometimes we'll go for a walk in the neighborhood, you know, anything just to get out, get ourselves out of our minds, and just kind of, you know, redirect a little bit. But I agree, it's not a cure, but it does. I mean, exercise and diet can help with any mental or physical ailment that you have, I think, a little bit. But
Yeah, but it's never a cure.
no, it's not. No, I wish it were. And people would have told me that, people say, oh, you need to get off the medication. I'm like, that's a really dangerous thing that you're suggesting for me. And you
Right.
obviously have never had a condition so severe that you had to be on medication, and I'm glad that exercise works for some people. I really am. I mean, I'm overjoyed for them, but it's just, in this case, it's not ever going to happen for me.
So what's your biggest fear of having to come off medication? Is it because you know what that's like, or is there something that really scares you about it?
I'm afraid that I'll hurt myself. I'm afraid I won't be able to care for my son because I'll be incapacitated, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, that's a big fear right there. I understand that for sure. Do you have anything else you want to leave people with? Any thoughts or?
It sounds strange coming from me, but you can't beat yourself up, and you need to. I mean, if you can, seek out whatever resources you can, whether it's reading about OCD, whether it's, going on medication. I know it's kind of, it's difficult to get the right combination of medications sometimes, but ultimately it can be very beneficial. And getting therapy, talking. I mean, I know a lot of us are afraid, we put this mask on where we're afraid to be anything less than perfect or appear to be anything less than perfect. And nobody's perfect. I mean, we're all human. And you really can't beat yourself up. It's not a way to live.
Well, I like that. I want to thank you for being on with us today and for being so open and sharing, these scary things that can go on in your mind. And I really hope that this week gets a lot better for you and your son, as well, and you too.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for talking to us today, Cheryl.
All right, thank you.
Do that. Okay, everybody. We are having Dr. Heidi Green, on next, and I am going to find her. Uh-oh. She is unable to join, it says. Let me just give her a second, and we'll see if she can get back up with us. If you have more concerns about obsessive compulsive disorder, and if you might have it or if a family member might have it, you can always head over to HealthyPlace.com, and we have a lot of information there. You go to the main page, and then under conditions, when you hover over that, you'll see OCD listed there, and there's a bunch of articles and things that can help you answer questions for yourself and your family members. And let me see. I really hope she is here because I think we have some questions. No, she's not, everybody. Something must have happened, technical difficulties, or she is a doctor, so perhaps something took her away. But I appreciate all of you being here today, and we're going to be back again in 2 weeks with an Insta Live, and I hope to see you then. And thanks again.